Well, before I get it started, I want to thank you for coming to the forum. We all lead busy lives, and I really appreciate and am grateful for everyone's due diligence in being here today to do your civic duty and to be part of the process, and to get to know the candidates that we will be considering for the very important, necessary work that they'll be doing. I would like to bring up and welcome Helen Wheatley and Joe Downing, first round up.
Well, hello. My name is Helen Wheatley, and I am running for Port Commissioner. I'm the challenger in this race, and I'm running because as Commissioner, I would be better for jobs, I'd be better for the environment, and I'd be better for taxpayers. The Port loses money every year, and it uses taxes to cover losses from its operations. It's time for the Port to begin to move away from discredited trickle-down economic models and move towards more community focus with broad representation, with transparency, and with an emphasis on the blue-green alliance that can help to guarantee sustainable family wage jobs for the future. Now, on climate change and sea level rise, these are really big issues for the Port, and we need to address them with immediacy. We need to address them with realism. We need to use best available science, and I mean current available science. And we also need to be fair, and I think that is something that is really important to emphasize when we look at the costs that we are going to incur. Puget Sound is in trouble. Anyone who's lived here for a while has probably noticed, for me at least, the bird population has really taken a hit in Bud Inlet. I'm really serious about pollution, and I'm serious about environmental justice. And that's why I have long advocated for removal of the Capitol Lake Dam on the Deschutes River, for enforcement of environmental laws. And it's also why for over 20 years I've been involved with a group called Heart of America Northwest, which is supporting the cleanup of Hanford nuclear site and clean energy and nuclear safety in the Pacific Northwest. I represent Heart of America on the Hanford Advisory Board. And doing that over many years has given me a lot of experience with public involvement in complex issues involving multiple jurisdictions. I want the Port to serve the public interest, not special interests. And I want to remind you that the Port is a 3-member commission. With my election, we'll have a majority that will be able to move the Port in a new and better direction. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Downing, the incumbent Port Commissioner at Port of Olympia. I'd just like to start by saying, because I see some familiar faces from other Democratic groups, that I'm running for a second term because we're just hitting our speed. The 3 commissioners, Commissioner Zita, Commissioner McGregor, and myself, are just hitting our stride in terms of good communication, good policy, what's good for the community at the Port. I want to just own up to the fact that we had a little bit of a rough start the first couple of years. We had a couple of controversial issues. Military cargo was one, fracking was another. And so we butted heads a little bit. Now, I actually regret some of the things I might have said. And I just want you to know I've learned a lot in the job. I think I'm good at the job because I have an excellent background for being Port Commissioner. 20 years in private industry, 10 years state service, master's in business. And so the Port is a municipal corporation, which means that it does collect tax dollars, but it also runs businesses such as the marine terminal, such as the marina, such as the airport, and quite a bit of leased land. So I just want to say that on a personal level first, that we're learning as we go, but we're really hitting our stride. So, I'm a great deal of respect for my fellow commissioners as well. And so I basically want to continue some of the good work we've done. I don't think that it's a bipolar choice between myself and my opponent when it comes to the environment, because this port, and most recently, we've remediated 6.5 acres of downtown land, which then allows for development and housing to come in, because I believe in infilling of the housing in Olympia to relieve the congestion we see in our freeways. We're doing things in Lacey to provide jobs. We helped fund a Lacey incubator space, which is going to provide job skills for people that are in between jobs or that want to change careers, and so that's an excellent thing. We're working in Tumwater in interlocal agreement with the city of Tumwater over a habitat conservation plan that will then allow us to build here and protect the gophers over here. So this current commission does care a great deal about the environment, and my opponent did mention sea level rise. And so if you respect City of Olympia, if you respect Lot, and if you respect the port, all three of us pitched in $75,000 towards a study to cope with sea level rise. What do we do? And so I agree with my opponent that it's an important thing for the future. We're addressing it as we speak. We're methodically addressing that. And so I think that's an important thing. So please support me in my quest for re-election. I'm so excited about the port and what it can do. Thank you very much. Community assets are another important aspect of the port. Thank you for your time.
Could you please help the audience understand how, if you're elected or re-elected, will you put the interest of all taxpayers above the special interests of groups like the Yacht Club and private logging companies?
Okay, special interests. Well, I might differ from the person that wrote that question down in terms of special interest, because there's many interests in the community. So from one end of Thurston County to the other, there's many unique interests. And so we represent all those interests equally. It's important for us to do so. So I get a lot of questions about the Weyerhaeuser contract. I promise you, I want to look at that. My latest idea, which this takes years to get to know the port intimately, but I would like to compare that Weyerhaeuser contract, for example, with the contract of a logging company that's shipping out of Everett, another logging export port. And so I don't really think that I want to investigate that further, but I don't believe that Weyerhaeuser is a special interest. Yes, they are our largest client, and I'm happy that we're improving the balance of trade for this country by being a net exporter at the Port of Olympia. We should all be happy that other countries are not buying all our debt, and so we're indebted to them because we are a net exporter right here in Olympia. So I support that, and I support the EIS process that the Department of Enterprise Services is undertaking. Our own legislature gave them $2.5 million to study the question of Capitol Lake. And so in my view, what's important is water quality and sediment management. I'm going to leave it to the experts to come up with, to inform us as to what a good conclusion for the Capitol Lake, Deschutes estuary would be. Thank you.
Well, I want to answer the question, but I'll briefly address the Capitol Lake issue. The problem with an EIS is it's a selection of choices, and the choices are policy matters, and the commissioners are charged with both policy making and oversight. In this case, it's an issue of what is the policy position of the Port Commissioner. And so I'm happy to answer that question and say, I already have studied this issue for a very long time, and I know that it's very important to remove the dam. And I know that the science supports that, and I know that the issue, and let me just explain that a little bit, it goes to pollution. The issue is pollution largely from the algae in Capitol Lake. There's also the warming of the lake. It is not a good environment for fish, and it's one of the reasons why we've seen a decline in the waterfowl as well. We need to recognize that we're in the lower part of the sound, that what we have here are highly productive estuary tidelands, and that what we need is plankton production. This used to be an area where smelt was actually harvested right in Budd Inlet because we produce plankton here. So So that is a very important thing to keep in mind. I think we can certainly talk about solutions that are best for as many people as possible, but it's really important to remove that dam, and that's just the way it is, and we've known that for a long time. Oh, okay, I haven't even gotten to the question. So the other thing that I guess really quickly that I would emphasize is that the problem with having port operations that lose a lot of money is that it's kind of an opportunity cost. You can't invest in other things if you're spending your money on something else. And that is the issue that we need to look at, and we need to do it with a certain degree of awareness of where we are and what the global situation is and what the situation is in Thurston County. I really support the idea of looking very hard at the job market in Thurston County and saying, what can the Port of Olympia do to support job production, good jobs, skilled jobs in Thurston County? Thank you.
How much taxpayer money did we spend buying cranes for Weyerhaeuser, and why did we buy them for Weyerhaeuser?
I honestly don't know the answer to the question of how much we spent for the cranes, especially if you add in the cost of the debt, especially since the debt has been refinanced. And I will observe that this is another issue in terms of oversight. I think it's really unfortunate that the port found itself in a situation where it had to refinance its debts and stretch them even further out into the future. So that's an issue. The depreciation of this kind of heavy equipment is an issue, and the underutilization of the crane is an issue. Now, I've certainly read comments from the past executive director on how he believed that there would be a market that would require the use of this crane. It was argued that there would be ships here so much that it would be used all the time. And that simply has not come to pass. And that raises the issue of what kind of a feedback mechanism do you have? Like when you make a capital investment at the port, how do you assess whether it's been successful, whether it's paying its way? At what point do you decide that it's not? I think that there has to be a lot more robust and deliberate oversight when it comes to capital investments like that.
That's a good question. Thank you for that question about the harbor crane. We call it a mobile harbor crane, and before that there were a different type of crane. And I want to point out that the past commission did purchase that crane. It was not myself or Commissioner Zita or Commissioner McGregor that purchased that crane. But what I understand is that for us to be a complete marine terminal, we need the crane because it's backup to the cranes on ships. And so I personally, would like to see it better utilized as well, but that's the actual history of that crane. And so I spend my time working hard to incentivize the port to gain those cargoes for the marine terminal, because I'll just come out and say it, I'm a firm believer in the marine terminal future for several reasons. One is not only the business, they're not making new marine terminals anywhere, and once you give it up, it's gone. Secondly, if you give up that marine terminal, you give up our lifeline, emergency lifeline. If we've seen earthquakes in California recently, we could have those same earthquakes up here. We've seen closures, multi-day closures of I-5. If that became an earthquake event where Olympia was totally isolated, we would really need that marine terminal. And incidentally, we don't get the dredging from the Corps of Engineers unless we have a marine terminal. So there would be no, we can just land a ship at whatever marina. No, that wouldn't happen because all of Bud Inlet would be silted in without the Corps of Engineers. So that's pretty essential, and I would like to see more business for that marine terminal, or sorry, for the crane. Thank you.
Well, I would just like to very briefly address this idea that the marine terminal is necessary for emergencies, and especially earthquakes. I'm afraid that if you look at the Thurston County Emergency Management Plan, they don't even look at the port isthmus because it's fill, and they expect it to be, it's a red zone on their map. They don't expect it to be functional in the event of an earthquake. So I think that's a really mistaken idea. I am actually quite concerned about that, and one thing that I would like to say is that as a commissioner, I would like to make sure that we have a really robust emergency planning system for what happens with the isthmus, and I'm especially concerned since we're putting so many residences there.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a little bit conjecture on the part of where an earthquake would strike. Again, it's important to have a marine terminal for just simply emergency preparedness. And we have had drills with the Thurston County Sheriff's Department utilizing the port as an emergency center. So I think that it's very important, and we would all appreciate that should that day come and people say that earthquake is coming.
Are you versed in port safety protocol? How frequently are safety inspections being conducted? And are businesses at the port meeting safety standards, those including the new ones that are planned for the port?
On the marine terminal, we have a marine safety officer, and we conduct drills at the port in terms of safety. And again, partnering with the Longshore Union, which provides great family wage union jobs. And that's the beauty of unions, that they advocate for safe working conditions. And so we do have safe working conditions at the port. The union advocates for that. We respond to that. And it's a safe place to work. And safety is job one at the port.
Well, I don't have specific answers to the questions about port protocols, but I can say that one of the things that concerned me about Westman Mill and the residential development there is that basically people who move into Westman Mill will be asked to sign a waiver regarding the location where they are and the inherent dangers of being there. That's one of the things that they said made building there okay, was because people would be informed about the hazards that they face when they move in. It concerns me that we have this mix of industrial and growing residential. I lived in Ballard and other places where you have that mix. You have to be really careful about that. There's a reason why in the past there was zoning to try to separate residential and industrial areas. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about something equivalent to the time that the stormwater treatment plant failed happening again. It concerns me that we're putting more and more residents in the area, and perhaps we're not having enough conversations about the mix of industrial and residential use.
Thanks, Helen, for bringing up the stormwater treatment issue. So again, the stormwater treatment plant was mandated by Department of Ecology to make sure that the runoff from the marine terminal that went into the water was as clean as possible and the proper amount of oxygen. So we've had several quarters of meeting those benchmarks, and we redesigned the whole system because of that one spill. So that's important, safety consideration.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that. I'm also concerned, of course, about the mix of logging trucks and residents, because it's an unfortunate mix. It's certainly, again, it's something that was talked about a lot in Seattle. When you have heavy trucks and residents mixing together. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Under what conditions will you raise the tax levy for the port? Again, please be specific. How do you justify this based on the colossal losses at especially the marine terminal?
I'm happy that that there's some effort to get a grip on port economics right now, where the question of sustainability is being looked at. And I'm eagerly awaiting the results of some of that effort. I don't support raising taxes until we get a grip on whether the current configuration of port activities is sustainable. I think that's the key question. And so that's where I stand on that. Now, on the question of whether taxes would ever be raised, there is a situation where I think it might be necessary to raise taxes, and that is for environmental cleanup. One of the charges for our port districts is to clean up the environment, to clean up the legacy pollution that was left behind. And that can be very expensive. And if it's necessary to raise taxes to do that, I would be willing to do that, with a considerable amount of consultation with the public beforehand.
And so each year, ports are allowed a 1% increase based on inflation, I think, and also and also when the county expands. So let's say we put in 200 new homes, then we're going to have greater tax collections. But the cents per thousand does not increase, and so ports are allowed, with the vote of the people, to go to 45 cents per thousand. But your Port of Olympia is at 19 cents per thousand. So we have very small increases each year with that new construction and with that 1%. One year we did increase it by 600,000 because there was several important projects that the Port Commissioners wanted to see happen. So we did increase it 1 year. And so my position on increasing taxes, you know, other than that 1% and the new construction, which is a small increase each year, I like to keep those taxes low. And so I would want to go out to the community and get a great deal of community input if there was something that we felt was important, such as economic development of some sort, such as getting involved in fiber broadband or expanding broadband service in Thurston County. Then we go to the people and say, we need $10 million, for example, to get into this. But we would really have a lot of public process with that. And I do want to say that with those tax increases, we have done a lot of environmental cleanup. We spent $1.2 million remediating those 6 acres downtown so we can bring in development. We've done other projects related to Bud Inlet, figure out what we do to clean up some hot spots in Bud Inlet. So the port is quite involved in environmental cleanup. And I've recently been studying the overall debt of the port. And believe it or not, it's a small amount that goes to the marine terminal, other than the wastewater treatment plant, which did cost us about $13 million. Again, that was a prior commission between us and the Department of Ecology we worked out. And so that's an excellent treatment system. I have to stop now. Thanks, I could go on.
What specifically would you recommend to do about limiting log exports, and how can this be done to best protect jobs and our environment?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question to limit log exports and to protect jobs and the environment. So let's unpack that a little bit. The situation with the marine terminal, I want to make it really clear that this isn't entirely up to the Port Commission. Now, I think about 1.5 years ago, was it? I came to the Port Commission and I said, you know, you really ought to take a hard look at China, because it's a major customer. You know, the customers for the marine terminal logs are basically Japan, China, and South Korea, and that's it. So we have so far had a fairly steady business with Japan over a fairly long period of time. We have to look carefully at the Japanese economy and other global economic issues and also to think about Weyerhaeuser as a global corporation now and where it thinks it might want to go in the future. None of that is anything that the Port Commission has control over. The Port Commission certainly doesn't have control over our relationship with China. And I know that our log exports to China have dropped off pretty significantly this year. I looked at the first quarter and I believe they went down to China, the exports to China went down by about 30%. So that is something that is not in the control of the Port Commission. And similarly, the fact that our port has to compete with a lot of investment at other ports that are better positioned to do international trade. That's another thing where we have to ask the question, at what point is it worth continuing to try to keep up with the investment of other ports that are perhaps in a better position to do that international trade?
How many people in the room, who doesn't have a cell phone right now? Anybody not have a cell phone? Okay, got one person. So virtually all our cell phones come from overseas. And so again, I support the balance of trade, which means we export products that we're good at making. And like it or not, the Northwest is very good at farming trees. I call it farming trees. And your corn has a 1-year life cycle. You get corn every July, whereas you get trees once every 50 years. And so tree farming is exactly what they do. I had the privilege in my second year as Port Commissioner of going down to Port Blakely tree farms and getting the tour, and they took me through the entire 2,200 acres. And I saw the environmental safeguards, I saw the replanting, I saw the harvesting, and so I support logging. If we could increase our export of logs, you know, that's the difference between the two of us. I'm 100% behind this marine terminal because it creates jobs, it's got a multiplier effect on the community. That's economic development. When a ship is in the harbor, 100 log trucks a day, and by the way, the port paid for reinforcing Plum Street so that the log trucks could drive down. You notice they're always in the left lane because that lane is reinforced for log trucks. The port paid for that. So we have a tremendous infrastructure built up to accommodate this. We're good at it. We're one of either the top or the second largest log export port on the Puget Sound. And I support that because I support what's good for America is the balance of trade. So we're trying hard to do that with our products. I mean, let's face it, if you didn't like, you know, you didn't want to be, well, anyway, we all need our cell phones. We get them and we export. Well, we're good. They're good at making cell phones. We're good at making trees, among other things in the Northwest.
Well, our revolution was born out of a progressive movement championed by the likes of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ro Khanna, and Nina Turner. The question is, how are you like them, and how do you differentiate yourself from each other, from the other candidate in the race?
I can't tell you how much I care about the Democrats being united and coming together for 2020. I mean, I can't tell you, it's off the charts. So we need to work together and be strong to replace that guy in the White House. I mean, that's just how I feel. Now, one of my favorites is Pete Buttigieg. You know, he's a straight talker. He's the new generation. He's got fresh ideas. So that's one of my faves. And, you know, so I appreciate everything in this pledge. The only thing I differ on is probably free college for all, because I think it has to be more nuanced. Because I don't want parents that are making $200,000 or $300,000 a year to have free college for their kids. There's no justice. So in anything in life, I don't believe in flat taxes. I don't believe in flat car tab fees. I don't believe in anything flat. It needs to be graduated, because that gallon of milk we buy, that's a big deal to some people. Other people just do it without even thinking. So, you know, I think that that's important. And so, you know, I guess I lost track of the question because I got a little passionate.
Well, the next part is, how do you differentiate yourself from the other candidate in your race?
Well, the other candidate, I believe, is Helen. Proud of her for running for Port Commissioner. I honestly am. At first I was a little upset because every incumbent would like a free lunch, meaning no opposition. But that's not really democratic. So here's Helen says, I'm going to carry the torch and I'm going to run against Downing in this election. So I appreciate that, because that's democracy. And, you know, I appreciate democracy. I appreciate being here, talking with people. I'm more of a centrist Democrat. So, you know, I feel like it's important to appeal to both sides. I think both of us were at a Republican women's picnic the other day because we realized that we represent the entire county, both 60% Dems and 40% Republicans, and that's what we need to do to win. And so, you know, I appreciate that. But I appreciate democratic values. I appreciate everything that Bernie's done. He's a firebrand. He's great. You know, I look forward to getting to know our Democratic presidential hopefuls better.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that you recognize the importance of having choice in an election, and I appreciate the question because of that. I think that was a really important reason why I decided to run, is that I think we need choice, and we need to have a time when people are called upon to talk about why they've done what they've done if they're an incumbent, and to talk about the future. So I really appreciate that. I think that it's really important to recognize that income inequality is as bad or worse now than it was in the 1920s. And that is a problem with under-regulated capitalism. And it's the reason why we have democracy, in order to be able to talk about that and do something about it, which again is a good reason to run for office. And I encourage people to do that, because if we don't step up, then things will continue as they are and we'll have business as usual. And I guess I would say very briefly that the difference between me and the incumbent is that I don't think that business as usual at the port is going to help us into the future. I am very serious when I say that I want to serve the public interest and not special interests. I think it's really important to think about the county as a whole and to not make assumptions about what the port is doing being the best thing for the county. And that's the conversation that we have to have. For me, creating jobs that are skilled, that help our young people in particular, because they're the ones who are really caught up in these low-wage jobs without much of a future. Those are the people who we should be looking at and trying to help. We need to create jobs for the future that are good for our young people, that will be sustainable for our young people. And there is a lot that the port can do for that.
Well, on behalf of Our Revolution, Thurston County, and Our Revolution National, I would like to thank both of you for coming to this forum. And can I get another round of applause for these great candidates? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.